To understand the history of Europe is to understand the history of a single family. For 6.5 centuries, the House of Habsburg did not merely occupy thrones, they redefined the very concept of sovereignty. Through a masterful blend of ecclesiastical legitimacy, strategic intermarriage, and sheer geopolitical endurance, they transformed a modest Swiss fortress into an empire that stretched from the silver mines of Peru to the grand cathedrals of Vienna. But the story of the Habsburgs is more than just a chronicle of power. It is a biological drama, a cautionary tale of what happens when a family attempts to sequester the divine right of kings within its own genetic pool. I am Dr. Amy Boyington, and today we examine the rise, the zenith, and the tragic biological implosion of the House of Austria. Our story begins in the year 1020 in a place called Habsburg, or Hawk's Castle, in modern-day Switzerland. For 2 centuries, the Habsburgs were little more than regional counts, but they possessed a singular predatory patience. The first true tectonic shift occurred in 1273, followed by a chaotic period known as the Great Interregnum. The German prince-electors sought a weak candidate to occupy the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, someone they could manipulate. They settled on Rudolf I of Habsburg. It was a fatal miscalculation by the electors. Rudolf was a man of cold, strategic ferocity. In 1278, at the Battle on the Machfeld, he crushed his primary rival, Ottokar II of Bohemia, and seized the Duchy of Austria. In one stroke, Rudolf had moved the centre of European gravity to Vienna. Rudolf's success birthed the AEIOU motto found on his successor's possessions. While its precise meaning remains a subject of scholarly debate, the most enduring interpretation in English is, "It is Austria's destiny to rule the whole world." Most dynasties expanded through the brutal, expensive efficiency of the sword. The Habsburgs, however, pioneered a far more intimate and cost-effective method of conquest. By the late 15th century, the family had codified their strategy into a famous Latin couplet. In English, it is translated into, "Let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry. For the kingdoms which Mars gives to others, Venus gives to you." The mastermind of this marriage monopoly was Maximilian I, often called the Last Knight. In 1477, he secured a union with Mary of Burgundy, instantly adding the wealthy Low Countries, which is modern-day Belgium, and the Netherlands, to the family portfolio. Maximilian's ultimate masterpiece of matchmaking, however, occurred in 1496, when he arranged for his son, Philip the Handsome, to marry Joanna of Castile, the heiress to the Spanish crown and the burgeoning wealth of the New World. In a single generation, the Habsburgs had leapt from Central European dukes to masters of a global empire. In 1519, the fruits of these unions culminated in the person of Charles V. At just 19, Charles inherited a patchwork of territories so vast that he was the first to describe his domain as the empire on which the sun never sets. Charles was the quintessential Renaissance monarch, but he ruled a world fractured under the pressure of the Protestant Reformation. In 1521, he famously confronted Martin Luther at the Diet of Worms, standing as the final, unyielding wall of Catholic orthodoxy. Yet, for all of his piety, he was a pragmatic cosmopolitan, famously remarking, "I speak Spanish to God, Italian to women, French to men, and German to my horse." The sheer scale of his responsibilities, fighting the Ottoman Empire to the east, the French to the west, and Protestant rebels at home, eventually broke him. In 1556, Charles V performed the unthinkable. He abdicated. He split the house in two, creating the Spanish Habsburgs under his son Philip II and the Austrian Habsburgs under his brother Ferdinand I. This created a unique geopolitical problem. Both branches held on to a precarious set of territories that were surrounded by enemies, chiefly the French Bourbons and the Ottoman Turks. To ensure that a Spanish throne was never in the hands of non-Habsburgs, and vice versa, the two branches began a policy of cross-pollination. For the next 150 years, the marriage contract became the primary tool of statecraft. The logic was simple. If a Spanish princess married an Austrian archduke, the inheritance remained in the family. If she married a Frenchman, the empire was lost. By the mid-16th century, simple first cousin marriages were no longer enough to satisfy the dynastic hunger for security. The family turned to avunculate marriages, unions between an uncle and his niece. In 1570, Philip II of Spain, a man so devout he was called the Prudent, married his own niece, Anna of Austria. She was the daughter of his sister, Maria, and his cousin, Emperor Maximilian II. This was actually not seen as a scandal in the eyes of the church. It was a matter of high diplomacy requiring a papal dispensation. Philip needed a male heir, and he believed that the most legitimate womb was one that shared his own imperial blood. The result of this union was Philip III, who continued the tradition. But the peak of this biological insularity occurred during the reign of Philip IV in the mid-17th century. After the death of his first wife and his only son, Philip IV found himself in a succession crisis. In 1649, at the age of 44, he married his 14-year-old niece, Mariana of Austria. Mariana was originally betrothed to Philip's son, Balthazar Carlos. When the prince died, however, Philip simply took his own son's place in the marriage contract. The union was a genetic catastrophe. Mariana was Philip's niece, but due to previous intermarriages, they were actually more closely related than a standard uncle and niece. Though Mariana was pregnant many times, only 2 children survived from their union. Their eldest daughter, Maria Theresa, was famously depicted in Velázquez's Las Meninas, seen here. She survived to adulthood, married her uncle Emperor Leopold I, but unfortunately died at 21 after multiple difficult pregnancies. Then the other only surviving child was Charles II, the only male heir to survive to adulthood. He became the final Habsburg king of Spain, and we shall discuss him next. To the modern eye, the family tree of the 16th and 17th century Habsburgs does not resemble a tree at all. It resembles a web, or perhaps a knot, or even a circle. While other dynasties sought alliances to expand their borders, the Habsburgs became obsessed with a different goal: preventing the world they already owned from leaking away. The physical cost of this biological sequestering began to manifest in the portraits produced by the court painter Diego Velázquez. The Habsburg jaw became a genetic branding. The jaw was accompanied by a protruding lower lip, called the Habsburg Lip, and a high incidence of a tongue so large it caused constant drooling. But the external deformities were only on the surface. Inside the palaces of Madrid and Vienna, the real toll was measured in infant mortality. In an era when child death was common, the Habsburg rates were uncharacteristic. Between 1527 and 1661, the Spanish royal family saw 80% of their children die before the age of 10. The genes were becoming homozygous, meaning harmful traits that usually remain hidden were being expressed in every generation. As the French ambassador famously reported back to Louis XIV, the Spanish court is a nursery of ghosts. The princes are born tired and the princesses are born old. All of this led to the final agonizing chapter of the Spanish Habsburgs, Charles II. Charles II was unfortunately so inbred that his inbreeding coefficient was at a higher level of inbreeding than if his parents had been biological siblings. Charles was the human embodiment of a dynasty's refusal to let go. He apparently didn't speak until he was 4, apparently didn't walk until he was 8. His jaw was so severely misaligned that his upper and lower teeth could not meet, making it almost impossible for him to eat his food. The British ambassador Alexander Stanhope wrote of the king in 1698. He has a ravenous stomach and swallows all he eats whole, for his nether jaw stands so much out that his 2 rows of teeth cannot meet, to confirm which I have seen him chew a fig, and he found great difficulty. Charles II was also chronically ill, but his greatest failure in the eyes of the dynasty was his infertility. Despite 2 marriages to Marie Louise of Orleans and Maria Anna of Neuburg, he could not produce an heir. When he died in 1700, childless and broken, the Spanish Habsburg line was extinguished, triggering the brutal War of Succession. However, while the Spanish line withered, the Austrian Habsburgs faced their own existential crisis in 1740. The male line had also failed. Under a legal instrument known as the Pragmatic Sanction, Maria Theresa took the throne, the only woman to ever rule the Habsburg lands in her own right. Maria Theresa was the eldest daughter of Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI and his wife Elisabeth Christine of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Her father Charles VI was the last male member of the House of Habsburg of the Austrian side. Having lost his only son in infancy, he had spent much of his reign obsessed with the Pragmatic Sanction, a legal decree designed to ensure that his daughter, Maria Theresa, could inherit the ancestral Habsburgs lands, despite her being a woman. Upon assuming the throne, Maria Theresa was immediately attacked. Frederick the Great of Prussia invaded her territories, assuming a woman would be an easy target. But he later remarked that the only man in the House of Austria is Maria Theresa. She was formidable. She even went to battle whilst pregnant. Maria Theresa was known as the Great Mother of the dynasty. She bore 16 children, including the future Marie Antoinette, and she used them as diplomatic chess pieces to stabilise Europe. She was a demanding mother, though. She maintained a vast network of spies at the courts of her children, sending them constant, often scathing letters of advice. To Marie Antoinette, she wrote, "Your beauty is not so great. Your talent and knowledge are even less. You must work if you wish to be respected." Maria Theresa was formidable. Between 1748 and 1756, she embarked on a series of enlightened reforms that would dismantle the feudal remnants of the Middle Ages. She was a paradox, though, a devout conservative Catholic who nevertheless curtailed the power of the Church to strengthen the state. She did 3 impressive things. The bureaucracy. She centralised power in Vienna, creating a professional civil service that answered to her and not the local lords. The military. She founded the Theresian Military Academy in 1751, ensuring that her officers were promoted based on merit and not just on noble birth. Education. In 1774, she created a system of mandatory primary education for both boys and girls. She believed that a literate population was a productive and more taxable population. When she died in 1780, Maria Theresa had taken a crown that was being mocked by the world, and she left behind an empire that was the cultural and political centre of Europe. She had successfully navigated the transition from a feudal family business to a modern state entity. By the 19th century, the world was changing. The Industrial Revolution and the rise of nationalism were forces that a multi-ethnic feudal empire could not easily contain. In 1806, under pressure from Napoleon Bonaparte, the Holy Roman Empire was formally dissolved, replaced by the Austrian Empire and later by the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy. The final great protagonist of the Habsburgs was Franz Joseph I, who took the throne in 1848. He was a man of the old world, a bureaucrat who reportedly worked 18 hours a day at his standing desk. But his reign was a catalogue of personal and political tragedies. His wife, the beautiful and elusive Empress Elisabeth, known as Sissy, was assassinated by an anarchist in 1898. His only son, Crown Prince Rudolph, died in a mysterious suicide pact at Mayerling in 1889. Finally, in 1914, the assassination of his nephew and heir, Franz Ferdinand, ignited the fires of World War I. Franz Joseph died in 1916 in the midst of the carnage. He did not live to see the end of his house. In 1818, the last emperor, Karl I, was forced to renounce participation in government. After 645 years, the Habsburgs were no longer the masters of Europe. The House of Habsburg remains one of the most polarising families in history. They were the ultimate middle managers of the divine right, holding together a patchwork of ethnicities and religions for centuries. They were patrons of the arts, the builders of Vienna, and the defenders of Christendom. Yet they were also a family that tried to outrun time and even biology. They proved that you can own the world, you can control the church, and you can marry the most powerful people on earth. But you cannot survive the march of history if you refuse to change. Was the Habsburg downfall a result of their genetic insularity? Or was the multi-ethnic empire simply too large for any family to hold? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching once again. I hope you've enjoyed it, and please do like and comment and subscribe.